Hi, everybody. Thank you, Michelle, for the invitation to be here, and thank you, everybody at TULCA Festival. This is my first time in Ireland, and I'm obsessed so far. It's a lovely place, so thank you for having me. First, I'll talk a little bit about ICI. As Michelle mentioned, we support curators around the world. We're a small nonprofit based in New York City with a completely global reach. It's only 13 people at the organization, but thousands of artists and curators have come into our network over the course of 50 years. It's actually quite hard to talk about what we do because we do so much. Our approach is experimental, it's very flexible. We're working in over 70 countries and constantly adapting to those new contexts that we're in. In each of those contexts, there are different needs of each community with different ecosystems, forms of education, beliefs, vocabularies, and we're constantly needing to, change and adapt and learn from those experiences. Because of this, we're often asking more questions than providing answers, and continuing to expand definitions of words like curator, exhibition, and impact. For this presentation, I'll start to redefine those words with you and ask a few questions. First, what is a curator? To ICI, a curator is Laura Augusta. And from Laura, I've learned that a curator is somebody you share a meal with. This is Laura in Stafford, Kansas, the town her family operated a farm on for many years. Laura and I have been developing an exhibition called Mud and Corn and Stone and Blue, a very poetic show telling the story of conflict between the United States and Central America through the lens of U.S. agriculture policy, mainly relating to corn. And Laura is able to tell this story from her own family history, but also from spending time in Central America and meeting a lot of artists in Guatemala, El Salvador, and many other countries. The exhibition is very personal because it takes the starting point of James Dean Pruner, a relative of Laura's who had passed away in the 80s, and you see him here. Towards the end of his life, Jim did live in Stafford County, in Kansas, where Laura's family had a very large farm. On this farm, Jim kind of isolated himself in a very distant area away from the big family home, and he had a bus, he built a studio, he was extremely prolific with paintings, drawings, zines, and really built a community of friends around him. When Jim died in the 80s, this community became custodians of his legacy, including his sister Susan, who's Laura's aunt. In order to tell a really complex narrative across time and across borders in our exhibition, Laura and I, we needed work by Jim in Mud and Corn and Stone and Blue. But to get that work, we had to go to Kansas. And in August of this year, I had the pleasure of joining Laura on a road trip to several rural towns where bringing a curator from New York City, that had never happened before. In August, I went to Kansas and we had to meet Susan, who's Jim's sister. For 35 years, Susan had kept Jim's work as best as she could. She's not a museum curator, she's not a formal collector. She's not a museum. She runs a B&B in a very rural part of Kansas, and she loves and appreciates art in many forms. It didn't feel right, though, to bring her precious family members into this exhibition without meeting her. I couldn't just send her a contract or send a fine art shipping company to her house. It just wouldn't have worked. So in order to make this happen, we really had to build trust with her. Of course, Susan is Laura's aunt, so they already knew each other, but I needed to build trust with her. ICI was going to be traveling Mud and Corn and Stone and Blue for multiple years, and we were asking her to hand over her brother's paintings. So in order to make this exhibition happen, we started a process that Laura calls convivencia in Spanish, or coexistence in English. And I was nervous to go on this trip, but I realized that Laura and Susan were also nervous because they were inviting this complete stranger into their home, and it was filled with memories and emotions. And over the course of 2 days, we spent a lot of time together. We went into Susan's basement where she keeps Jim's work. I was immediately struck by the sheer volume, and this is only one small part of that basement. And it's also one part, just one tiny part of the work that Jim had done. Organized in rows, we started to pull pieces out that could be part of the exhibition, but we couldn't make any decisions yet. We had to get to know each other over a meal. So Laura and Susan and I went out to dinner, and we also spoke nothing of the art world. We spoke about how we met our partners, what kind of music we like, and Susan even told me about her experience in cooking school in Cork in Ireland. And I said, oh, I'm going to Ireland in a couple months. And it was amazing to just bond on those, shared, inspirations. And so after dinner, we went back to Susan's B&B. We spread out all of the work on her kitchen table and talked about what she would feel comfortable with, what made sense, what represented Jim best. And instead of Laura as a curator, just picking the pieces she wanted, it was a real conversation. And without that trip, we would have never been able to bring Jim into the exhibition and really represent him. And you'll see part of the exhibition here. This is Jim's installation in the show. And without that trip, we couldn't have ever made connections from rural Kansas to Central America and show his practice beyond his lifetime. And it's a large group exhibition, and it starts to also lead me to my next question. What is an exhibition? If we're asking what's a curator, well, what's an exhibition? And to ICI, an exhibition is Sunlight on the Seafloor. Sunlight on the Seafloor is a new exhibition that ICI also just opened. It's curated by Paula Naughton and Marina Reyes-Franco, and it's currently on view at the Museum of Contemporary Art in San Juan. This exhibition starts with Paula Naughton, who's a Dublin native. She's an artist and curator, and she went to graduate school in London. While in London, she learned about the Chagos Archipelago. It's an island region in the Indian Ocean. You'll see that on the map, in the middle of nowhere. It couldn't be further from any other continent. Paula learned that in the late 1960s and early 1970s, the native Chagosians were forcibly removed from their home when the British rented the island region to the US to build a military base. As a young and maybe a little precocious student in the early 2000s, Paula learned that members of the Chagosian diaspora lived on the outskirts of London, and she started to meet with the members of the Chagos refugee group, and all of these members had been fighting for fighting for their return since exile in the early 1970s. Starting as purely an oral history project, Paula found that the Chagosians had very little from their home. They had no photo documentation, they had no objects, and no cultural belongings. And instead, they pointed her to Clement Siotu, a painter. And Clement paints the history of Chagos from an anti-colonial perspective. He grew up on the largest island of the region called Diego Garcia, where the main US military base now sits. Those paintings play with time in a very non-linear way. Clement's offer this history in a non-colonial perspective, filled with memories of what Chagos was really like, pre-invasion, post-invasion, picking up on characteristics of architecture, daily life that they don't have any photo documentation of. And fast forwarding a bit, I had seen one of Clement's paintings in New York, and for 2 years, I couldn't stop thinking of his practice. There was something there. I was like, could we do a show? I don't know. So I met Paula, and she said, yeah, it would be great to do a show with Clement's work. But Clement's practice has never been contextualized outside of Chagos. And ICI being ICI, we know that the story of Chagos is unique, but it's not completely foreign or singular. This has happened before. So we connected Paula to Marina Reyes Franco, a curator based in San Juan, and no stranger to living in a colony. Together, Paula and Marina, they developed Sunlight on the Seafloor, and it's truly a vehicle to empower artists and visitors in post-plantation societies, sites of military occupation, and in places where cultural memory is really lost. It's very similar to these networks of resistance that we've been talking about. And there are even a few artists from Puerto Rico that are included in the show in this first venue, and they'll continue to travel on. But it really allows the exhibition to make those local histories of Puerto Rico connect to Chagos and other nations in the Caribbean across the oceans. And then the day before the exhibition opened in San Juan, international news erupted. On October 3rd, Chagos finally received sovereignty from the British government with a promise to let Chagosians return home. This is after a series of legal battles over 50 years since Chagosians were exiled, and automatically this exhibition is changed. The stories inside the exhibition are living, breathing beings that are deeply impacted by the world around us. And one of the installations is by the Chagos Research Initiative, and they immediately sprung into action. They updated their installation to include the news, and will continue to update their project for the next 5 years. To ICI, an exhibition has to be able to respond and take on new meaning as it travels. We know that it's going to change from site to site as it carries certain meaning in Puerto Rico, and we can only start to ask, what would this exhibition mean if it traveled to the UK, or to Ireland, or to Chagos? It'll take on a completely different life. So we ask, why are we doing this? What's the impact? What's the impact of really working in this way? And for us, the impact is Axis Mundo, queer networks in Chicano L.A. Axis Mundo traveled from 2017 through 2022 to 8 art spaces around the United States. The exhibition traced a network of queer and Mexican-American artists in East Los Angeles who came together in the 1970s, inspired by punk music, fashion, the Chicano rights movement, and more. They were also deeply affected by the AIDS epidemic in the 1990s, leaving many of their friends and family to hold on to memories. The exhibition that we traveled was curated by Ciandine Treboya and David Evans France, and Axis Mundo brought these stories that they thought were forgotten back to life. Like Laura, David and Ondine went into basements, closets, garages, under beds, pulled artwork out that hadn't been seen in years. It was delicate and a sensitive mission, but a mission nonetheless to tell a history that had almost been forgotten. Alongside this exhibition, the curators published the catalog. And for the first time, now these histories are entering classrooms and libraries. These artists are being spoken about in talks like this. And the impact of Axis Mundo is really far-reaching. We'll never know. Some artists have reached commercial success, but that's not the impact that we're really tracking or thinking about today. But as a start, we think about how when the show opened in Las Vegas, Nevada, a professor at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, walked into the exhibition and said, with tears in her eyes, "This is the first time I've seen myself in an exhibition." Can you imagine a professor who teaches art and art history never actually identifying with the content that she's sharing with her students? And now she sees this exhibition, and she's finally broken that barrier. Also in Las Vegas, you'll see up on the right, there's a photo of Andy with a young musician who felt a kinship to Posters by Nervous Gender, a great punk band. And inside that case are super DIY posters for their shows. In Las Vegas, there are very few independent music venues, and the punk scene was completely held inside of houses and house shows and in neighborhoods. So she was really appreciating seeing that scene, seeing those people that came before her. And at the last venue, in 2022, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Cleveland, Ohio, they were really incredible and brought many of the artists and family members of Axis Mundo to the exhibition to celebrate the end of this journey. To have all of these folks stand in one room together, it was not an easy feat. And more importantly, you'll see in this photo, they're all smiles on their faces, which wouldn't have happened at the beginning of the tour. 5 years earlier, there was still so much grief. People were reuniting after 40 years. Partners of those who had, fallen to the HIV and AIDS crisis. And now people are able to celebrate the good times. In every venue, people are kind of opening up more, connecting with one another, making new friendships, reuniting old friendships. And it was really incredible to experience this whole network that they thought was gone come back to life. And I could talk about Axis Mundo all day, but I'm actually going to let the artists tell you a little bit about it.
Axis Mundo has provided the public to come to know a lot of artists that they would not have come to know about had it not been for this exhibition. And also to get a glimpse of what was happening artistically in Los Angeles during the late 1970s and into the 80s.
What Axis Mundo means to me is a focus on Mundo Mesa and all of the networks of people that he was involved in. And it covers a period in Los Angeles of creativity among a lot of Latino and Chicano artists and musicians and fashion designers specifically that I always thought was going to be lost to history.
For me, Axis Mundo means coming back to a family that I've known for so many years. I think we were the trailblazers. And so when they see our work, they go, oh yeah, we did that. Oh yeah, that's who opened the door. Or yeah, it's okay to be who we are and to be out and not as closeted as we were.
I see my friends here that were part of this journey, and I realize how important it is to have, the support of your PAs. I thank Undyne and David for documented the undocumented, for creating this incredible exhibit that otherwise we're forgotten.
For art students who come to see the show, I think they will say, wow, they were doing this way back when, and I thought we had created it. As the audience is going through the show, they're going to think the same thing about all of the work. This is really very contemporary, as if it were done right now.
It's a very special experience. I feel so honored, to be a part of the group and for our story to be told and to be shared. And I feel in the bigger picture, it's going to continue. I mean, the shows are over, but I think the way it's affected people, a lot of young people, I think it put a seed of history.
Every time it's presented in a city, in a different city, there's a different audience that gets to see the work.
And every opening and every walkthrough, there's always a new story. There's always like a new layer of the history that's covered.
Axis Mundo is all of the stories we learned along the way.
It has really been an amazing journey. I don't think any of us thought it would have such a long life. So I've been very honored to be able to be a part of it.
Like, though this is the last stop on this tour, it doesn't feel like it's really the end in certain ways.
I really want to thank the extraordinary talent that has been involved in this project. I mean, each and every individual, each and every one of you, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. You did an excellent job. You kind of need history. Thank you.
So, ICI definitely doesn't have all the answers. I don't have all of the answers, but I love asking these questions with you.